I want to say, guys, that this is the Matrix, okay? If we watch this video, you will never be able to see video games the same ever again. You'll never be able to see them the same. Reality will be changed for you and altered. Here we go.
5 milliseconds at 1080p on a 13 teraflop machine for cloud shading only half the frame surface area. For my layman viewers, there's a massive FPS difference when clouds are disabled inside the overhyped, under-criticized, and supposedly faster Unreal 5.5. This basic effect is now running over 800% slower than it was in Unreal Engine 5.4, and still relies on temporal smear abuse to hide jittering. This isn't some, it's just going to be patched out scenario. I told Epic Games during the preview phase of 5.5 about this issue so that they could fix it before they release the production-ready version of 5.5. No one is talking about issues like this. And if I can show you something this broken in 30 seconds, imagine what I'll show you in the rest of this video.
Oh boy.
In this video, I'm going to set some new standards for both gamers and non-graphic developers on what 9th generation hardware can and should be delivering.
Okay.
First, I'll break down a logical approach to modern frame budgets to maximize the under-discussed limitations of modern consoles. Then we'll explore the declining quality and indirect lighting.
Yes, because consoles are PCs for cavemen. Yeah, exactly.
Solutions and disprove the ridiculous arguments made in defense of the performance and quality regressions seen in modern titles. Before diving into the technical breakdowns, it's very important to clarify the scenario that drives the studio's technological focus.
Yeah.
We are developing a fast-paced, realistic third-person action title. The gameplay alternates between outdoor and indoor environments, with roughly 75% of the scene composed of static objects.
Right.
The remaining 25% consists of dynamic elements, including characters, breakable objects, vehicles, moving light occluders, such as doors and windows, and finally, moving and toggleable light sources.
Okay.
It's very important for viewers to note that the conditions mirror the scenarios found in hundreds of games, including many produced on 9th Gen. This means the improvements and systems we advocate for, and with your support we may eventually produce, can benefit hundreds of third-party productions in terms of quality and performance. The target hardware for this studio, and what the industry should prioritize as well, is going to be the PS5 and Series X consoles because of their well-established enhancements over their base-gen and mid-gen predecessors. The plan we promote today accounts for the limitations between these machines, such as the lower theoretical teraflop power of the base PS5 and the Series X 2 times slower SSD speed. This allows for extra benefits when performance and image quality goals have been met universally between the two. So if you're out there with your 4070 talking about how great the features we criticize run on your hardware, you are incredibly irrelevant to this.
That's what I did. That's what I fucking did. Oh, jeez. Yeah, because for me, I haven't had... I have a 4090, right? Irrelevant? No, but he's right. He's absolutely right. You shouldn't judge the quality on something using the highest model. Absolutely not. It's a bad frame of reference. No, he's right about it.
This conversation because you
Why is the kid so hostile? Let me explain. When you know a lot about a topic and you think that nobody is listening to you and it's so fucking obvious, it's really fucking annoying. That's the reason why.
Way beyond target spec. The Series S remains as a destructive outlier due to completely botching the established hardware improvements from its mid-gen predecessor. And for this reason, we cannot scrutinize the butchered image quality or extreme upscaling we've seen on this console.
I mean, this looks like shit, right? I mean, what the fuck is this? Like, this is like from PlayStation 3. This is awful.
Since there doesn't seem to be enforced image quality standards, we believe the Series S should not dictate or limit the progress of visual standards for the truly hardware-enhanced machines. Now, let's discuss the appropriate target resolution and frame rate, because I find the performance or resolution mode trend to be a very poor approach to modern hardware utilization.
Thank you. I think the entire idea that, like, you can only play it with, like, performance or like, what do you call it? Like, optimization, like visuals, it's so stupid.
Consider the PS5 and PS4. On PS4,
it's like you either want the game to look bad or play bad.
30 FPS on a 1.9
What a great choice.
To double the frame rate, twice the amount of power is needed, which fits comfortably in the PS5 hardware budget, leaving large headroom for the much-needed 9th generation visual improvements. But resolution is a far more demanding challenge. Moving from 1080p to 4K requires 4 times the computational power, which consumes over half the available hardware resources.
Maybe I'm just talking out of my ass, but I think that people don't really give a fuck about 4K. I think that the difference between 720 to 480 is like 5x more than from 1080. Or sorry, from 1080 to 4K. Like 4K is nice, but most people that are playing PC games, especially, they're playing them on monitors that are less than 30 inches. I would say in most cases. So, like, what are you really doing with a 4K monitor resolution like that? Yeah, 1440. Yeah, for me, that's where I'm at, is I have 1440 as well.
Just to maintain
and I think that's
flawed appearance.
And really, it's just so much better. And, like, going from that to 4K is, like, so minimal, it's not worth it.
And limited complexity.
Unless you're like an aficionado, right?
Console visuals.
You really care about it.
And again, at only 30 FPS, which does not promote defined substantial improvement. But this compromise is completely unnecessary when you take into a whole new perspective on the situation. 60 FPS establishes...
What is this, bro? Like, what year is it? What year is this? Like, what the fuck is going on? How do console players keep eating shit?
Clear improvement from last gen without running up the hardware budget.
Yeah.
But what about resolution? From a financial perspective and a higher win ratio for consumers, we need to focus on the 4K and 1080p market. Instead of raising the resolution, which multiplies the cost of 60 FPS outside of hardware capabilities and tightly constrains the budget of enhanced visual techniques, the industry should focus on raising image quality via better anti-aliasing. This isn't a super original stance, but I'm going to bring a lot more context to the argument. I'm also saying we don't need AI or hardware upgrades to achieve this. Many 9th gen titles are being rendered below 1080p, so sticking to this resolution already logically improves quality here. 4K TVs can rely on integer scaling.
I think this is what some of the mods do as well.
From a 1080p output in the worst case scenario. But 4K upscaling from 1080p could be a lot more simple and in turn a lot cleaner than the current approaches. But it's a big topic for an upcoming video.
Okay.
Now let's dive into global illumination. And we're taking a much closer look into the subject than the most popular video covering the topic. First, let's discuss why light maps are not viable for our use case. First, there's developer resistance. There's the time-consuming baking processes, which doesn't mix well with modern development culture that caters to lazier and cheaper developments.
He says it's not good because people are lazy and they won't use it. Well, I guess that's one way to say it.
We refer to this as checkmark culture.
Yeah.
Many developers have also established light maps and large open worlds face significant memory challenges. Lastly, light maps don't mix well with destructible light sources or dynamic occluders. But so many people push this idea that the only alternative to light maps is bland ambient lighting with maybe some DFAO, or a super dynamic expensive GI method, when many 8th generation titles shipped with alternative solutions much more lightweight and in some ways higher quality.
Yeah, see, that's the thing, right? I mean, like, if you look at the quality here and you look at the quality there, yes, this is better, but I feel like you're looking at something that's like 85% versus like 100%. I do feel like graphics have kind of peaked.
Than what use case titles are using today. Before I go any further, I want to discuss the inevitable comments on the highly unrelated issue where dynamic objects pop out from their baked environments.
Oh, yeah.
This poor-looking phenomenon is usually implemented on purpose, usually in competitive games where player sight or perspective advantages are unwanted by the developers.
Yeah, of course. It's
but
annoying.
The systems I mentioned today should not introduce this effect, since both static and dynamic objects should be shaded in the same pass. Quantum Break, MGSV, and I'm pretty sure Detroit Human all utilize pro-based lighting, in combination with screen space GI-AO and or combined with an ambient lighting fallback. Unity has a pro-based lighting only system as well, that even records or really pre-computes the visibility of moving skylights. But a lot of people will argue against these volumetric-based approaches with concerns about leaking or wall thickness limitations. This sets the conversation for 3 different topics.
I think that what happens is that I feel like the reason why a lot of this happens is just because developers, and this is probably why a lot of developers are moving towards Unreal. I feel like in the last, well, I mean, we've got 2 big examples, right? We have CD Projekt Red, and we also have Halo, right? And so 343 Studios. two massive, insanely big IPs that are moving over to Unreal Engine, and those are just the ones that I'm thinking of right off the top of my head. I think that the reason why is because it standardizes everything, but the problem is that I think when everything becomes standardized, games don't have that like unique appeal. And I don't know how I can explain it, but it's like the DNA of certain games just feels different. And I do feel like with every game being made in Unreal 5, that will be lost. Yeah, Atlas is also moving to Unreal Engine. I didn't know that. Gameplay isn't tied to engines. I don't think it's necessarily tied to engines, but in a lot of cases it is, because the developers probably don't innovate separately from like just what the engine provides naturally. And it partially is, yeah.
Only familiar with overly simple ambient occlusion implementations that cause halo artifacts around objects like characters. This has long been an issue with UE4 and to this day even UE5's SSAO. But you can go back almost 9 years ago to MGSV, where its SSAO originally suffers from the same problems, but
This game came out 9 years ago? What the fuck happened? What happened? Like,
for driver-forced HBO+. A closed source technique, but often butchered, largely solves this halo problem at a dirt cheap price.
Yeah.
Another issue you'll find with most AO is their lack of lighting awareness. For instance, anything in direct light should not have AO applied if you compare to path tracing. This can be implemented as seen with this open source mobile compatible GTAO.
Okay.
Another issue with a lot of AO solutions is noise. And we've seen plenty of non-TAA reliant examples.
I think I saw that in Once Human before. Yeah, have you guys seen that in games? Let me see if I can pull it up. Because, yeah, I've seen it before myself. It's in Stalker 2. Really? Yeah, like that right there. Holy shit. Tarkov has a switch for it.
Non-TAA reliant examples, but I want to quickly mention
Dancing
MXAO,
Pixels. Yeah, I guess so.
which purposely doesn't use random sampling patterns because those require more expensive denoisements. Instead, it uses Bayer dithering because it's easier and cheaper to smooth. Retro games also use Bayer for smoothing, but in an analog sense. In other words, taking advantage of the easy smoothing properties offered in Bayer extend outside of SSAO. I could cover a lot more regarding the AO situation, but I'll go ahead and move on with a memory concern on probes.
Okay.
A smarter approach for this issue is to bake probe density near static surfaces while keeping it more sparse in open areas. Maybe introducing newer probes around dynamic objects. Leak prevention has been discussed in Detroit Human documents, and my personal favorite is from a GI SIGGRAPH presentation from 2021, using a low-resolution depth map function. Now that I've covered these popular graphic concerns, you're now ready for my addressment of the pros and cons of the technologies saturating modern graphic conversations. Then I'll discuss some of the forgotten gems of GI rendering to enrich consumer knowledge of existing graphic techniques and revive consumer awareness on optimized performance in this modern age of hardware abuse. Now let's talk about...
See, like, that's the thing is, like, I don't even know... Like, I've seen some of these examples myself, but, like, I've never really had it explained.
DDGI, which ray traces the environment's lighting in sparse amounts that end up being encoded into irradiance probes that light the environment with zero noise. It approaches leaking via adaptive probe relocation. DDGI can't provide ambient occlusion, though. To see what I mean, take a look at the path trace reference, then DDGI with conservative radius RTAO, and then DDGI with the UE4's SSAO. And like I said, we need better SSAO, but material AO is an important piece of the look that should be pre-computed for consumers.
Yeah.
Which is why it's so important to fix the baked material AO workflows inside Unreal, since they're far from being a checkmark workflow. But DGI also lacks indirect shadows present in path tracing, SVOGI, lumen, and even baked lighting inside Unreal, provided via distance fields, a very cheap and great looking effect for non-skeletal meshes. It's just that distance fields have to reside in VRAM, and although seemingly small to store, Unreal does a very bad job at optimizing the resolution on a per object basis. The last thing DDGI lacks is rough specular or radiance. You can see this difference in path tracing in Lumen versus DDGI. But this might just call instead for small-scale specular representation.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can really see a huge difference there or not. Yeah, specular reflection? Yeah.
As seen with quantum break, or probably a better example would be the Order's 1886 use of spherical Gaussians to get that very important directionality appearance.
Wait, so this came out in 2015? Something happened. Bro, in like 10 years, are we going to be back to making like Super Nintendo games and like nobody knows how to make Elden Ring anymore? Like, yeah, no, you can't make a 3D game. Like, are we going to just keep going backwards? This is nuts.
The lighting.
It's
now
a regression,
that I've defined Lumen GI's superior aspects over DDGI, now it's time to go over its major issues such as the cost, which can usually hang around 3.8 milliseconds in a large city environment on a desktop 3060. And remember, this is only the cost for Lumen GI, since Lumen Reflections introduced their own separate cost for any material below a certain roughness value.
Yeah.
I'm giving Lumen GI the best possible timing here, since I slowed down its update rates significantly from its default configurations, in combination with using its faster, softer ray tracing version.
Yeah, sure.
But despite being on its 5th iteration, none of the major issues everyone is talking about has been fixed, such as the disocclusion errors, the splotchy inconsistencies.
See, you look at that, bro. Like, look at this.
Has been fixed, such as the disocclusion.
That's weird. How does this happen? Holy shit.
Errors, the splotchy inconsistencies, noise, and smearing. Which is especially bad when you have a character with a camera-based turn animation where light can smear on the character's face. A scenario conveniently not replicatable in Fortnite. Lumen's normal-based temporal rejection either scales on the ineffective side or refuses to account for basic two-position subpixel jitter. And the importance of that issue will eventually be covered in our anti-aliasing technology video. It's now time to present some very optimized and criminally under-discussed indirect lighting techniques so we can continue getting the record straight. MGSV interpolates multiple sets of spherical harmonics containing times of day, weather cycles, and lighting scenarios.
Sure, yeah, a lot of games have that.
It shades diffuse indirect lighting on a texture half the size of the main resolution. Then, bilaterally upscales it by comparing the half-resolution depth texture with a full-resolution depth texture.
I don't understand, like, did it just get worse because of, like, people trying to save money? Because that's incredible.
So that all geometric lines are evenly and efficiently lit. But let's get more advanced though. The Division is another similar scenario with a mostly static environment with dynamic lights. The GI approach in the Division uses probes that store cube maps of the normal and albedo scene. The probes' visibility to each other is pre-computed and listed in memory. And of course some other complex concepts are applied, but we end up with a solution that creates bounce light per frame as lights are casted on objects. Short-term, non-screen space bound GI in an open world, all done on base 8th gen consoles. This is so much more impressive than the splotchy mess we have with Lumen in large-scale scenes. Let's talk about another lighting approach seen on PS4, such as shadow map occlusion tracing in Ghost of Tsushima. The devs use
that game looked really good. So is it just people that don't know how to use the tools and they just get lazy? Is that what happened?
Buffer cube map similar to the Division, and then trace the sunlight's shadow map to prevent
average gamer will not notice the shit. So this is the way I think average gamers see it. The games that have this, it creates a value and an improvement that is hard for people to really understand. But like they will notice it, but they won't notice that they notice it. Does that make sense? The game will just look better.
This technique is apparently a little crude, but I've never seen this exploited for a global illumination technique in terms of occlusion, etc. And it's something we need to start considering when we erase shadow maps with ray trace shadows that don't provide that depth information. Now our last mention for GI is going to be Radiance Cascades, which is not an 8th gen technique, but it was designed under a scenario where abusable and competent TAA could not be used, and the graphics programmer behind it wasn't a fan of the undocumented slow resolve timings not found in dynamic GI papers. Now, Radiant's Cascades comes from the screen space GI that introduces a optimized ray sampling method, where a fixed cost I've heard is possibly maintainable.
Yeah.
Basically, you have a dense layer of probes sampling a few directions in a very limited range. Then, another layer of probes, less dense than before, sample further information at a higher directional capacity.
I wonder if this is going to keep getting worse. I feel like it probably will. I think so, yeah. This is a technique that PoE2 uses? Maybe. Most people don't care. I think that people do care about a game looking good.
More layers or cascades.
So, like, to the extent that it makes the game look bad, they will care.
It's a concept that optimizes the spatial relevance of rays so that each layer can be interpolated for a coherent enough representation to generate realistic bounce light.
Especially when every game is using the same
done in
model.
2D, but there's already moving development in the 3D space, and now recently a very fast non-screen space implementation just saw the light of day. When you look at these techniques from a broader perspective, I really hope viewers can see the potential each technique brings for a specific problem.
Yeah.
I want to see more exploration in these approaches from graphic engineers, especially in Unreal.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, what he's really complaining about is that instead of developing their own lighting solutions that are intrinsic to that game and made for that game, they just use the default lighting solutions that Unreal has, and there's a lot of software and like hardware costs that creates. Okay. Yeah, I just, I mean, as I said, I understand about like probably 30% of this, maybe 40, but probably not even half.
You have an industry standard engine that is founded on temporal smear abuse and sustained by Fortnite, a game where expensive dynamic GI is actually justified because the environment is not static, but completely dynamic. We get games like Stalker 2 where the environment is static, but ends up performing and looking worse than it should in consumer hands.
Really? Is this true? I never ran into this, but I have a 4090. Is this true?
Fortunately, these legitimate problems will not be fixed or focused on by mainstream industry because there is no market incentive. Despite what I and many others consider peak abuse in performance and image quality standards, standout games will continue to thrive regardless as long as the majority of consumers excuse modern issues due to not knowing what's possible.
I don't think that people notice it. And the issue with the lighting is like the other video with the like anti-aliasing and seeing how people kind of like ghost around in frames. I think that that's much easier for a person to understand because it's just easier to understand than lighting, right? Because lighting has like a degree of logic behind the understanding. Whereas just being able to see a character moving and looking weird doesn't really take a lot. So yeah. Watch the newest video about the industry bullying him? Wait, what?
Possible in graphics optimization or simply having zero hope in future improvement. Threat Interactive is that hope. And your subscription to the channel is pivotal in the success of our mission. So if you haven't, subscribe right now if you care about modern image quality and basic performance standards, because that will push our content to the majority of consumers. This is your opportunity to establish a market that is being taken advantage of and validated and ignored. And if it interests you, binge our information-packed content, starting with our first video on fake optimization.
I think that the reason why a lot of people don't like this guy is because people like this guy from the perspective of people that are like lazy. I think in a lot of cases, people like him are inhibitors, where they think that, well, we don't want to do everything that he wants because it lowers the quality or it costs more time or money. But the reality is that I think that with anybody who's like, have you guys ever been in a class, like this is probably true in like high school or like maybe college, where like there were people in the class that were like hyper invested and hyper fixated on it. And when things weren't going the way that they were supposed to be going, that person got really upset or annoyed about it, right? And like we had the nerd. Yeah, well, I mean, like that's like one way to say it. But yeah, he has no chill. I love it. Exactly, right? And so whenever I look at this guy, I see somebody who's like really opinionated and extremely in like what would I really call it? There's the video. Give it a like. I completely support these guys, by the way. I think that they're fighting a good fight. And they're very invested, and like his goal is to make the experience better for the user. And I think that the perceived hostility is coming from the frustration that of the idea that like other people don't want to do the same thing, right? They want to innovate, they want to improve it, right? Hyperfixation, exactly. It's passionate, right? So yeah, that's the way that I see it the most, right? And what is this? People don't know how Unreal 5 engine works? Yeah, I don't really know. He's the guy who actually reads his textbooks. Yeah, exactly, right? There's a few studios that have created their own engine where games look truly decent with older hardware. Take Sekiro. Yeah, I think that's true too. There's definitely a lot of other studios that do it. But I do think that like his point about them just using the default solutions rather than building them themselves, like for like bespoke games, I think that's obviously like, I mean, you can clearly see why it's a problem, and you can also clearly see why people don't want to, why people think it's bad.